9:30, I'll call the meeting to order, and the first item of business is adoption of the agenda. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that the agenda be adopted as amended to update the March 2024 minutes and remove item 12D. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Minutes. Chris, moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that the minutes from the March 20th, 2024 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with those minutes? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we have two timed items, a minor variance at 9:30 and an OPA at 9:30. So we will move on to that. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that the council meeting be adjourned at 9:31 a.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And minor variance application A04-24. Spencer, I will turn it over to you before I ask the Committee of Adjustment for questions.
Thank you. Good morning to council, staff, and members of the public joining us here this morning. The application for a minor variance before the committee affects lands located at 547 Victoria Street in the village of Harrington. In this particular instance, the applicant has applied for two areas of relief, and they both relate to the proposed accessory structure he's proposing to construct. The first of which is with respect to the height. He's seeking to go to 5 meters rather than the 4 he's permitted currently. And the second being for the overall cumulative gross floor area for accessory structures, where the applicant has proposed 1,200 square feet. It has been advised that the applicant is simply looking for some additional room to store his lawn equipment and other personal items. As a result of circulation, there were no comments received from any neighboring residents or agency staff that would indicate any concern or objection to the application. Staff are supportive of the request today, and the applicant has also met with myself and the chief building official to go over the plans for the shop, and we're satisfied that the requested relief is appropriate, minor in nature, and does represent good planning. So I'm happy to answer any questions committee might have, and the applicant does send his regrets. He was called into work, so he did plan on being here, but I'm sure I can handle any questions you may have on his behalf.
Thanks, Spencer. Questions from the Committee of Adjustment on the report? Not seeing any. And the applicant is not here. Are there any members of the public, either here or virtually, who wish to speak to the application? All right. Then I have moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that the Township of Zorra Committee of Adjustment approve application A04-24 submitted by Joel McNeil for lands described as Lot 1 to 2, 13, Block Q, and municipally known as 547 Victoria Street, Harrington, in the Township of Zorra as it relates to 1. Relief from Section 5.1, Table 5.1.1.3, Regulations for Accessory Uses. I, to increase the maximum permitted height for an accessory structure from 4.0 meters, 13.1 feet, to 5.0 meters, 16.4 feet. And II, to increase the maximum permitted cumulative gross floor area for accessory structures from 100 square meters, 1,076 square feet, to 112 square meters, 1,200 square feet. To facilitate the construction of a structure accessory to a residential use on a property zoned residential type 1 zone R1 in the Township of Zorra, subject to the following condition. I, that the construction of the proposed residential accessory building detached garage be established in the general location as illustrated on Plate 3 of Report 2024-108 to the satisfaction of the Township of Zorra Building Department. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Spencer and or Mike, I assume you will follow up, make sure they're looked after. Thank you. And then we move on to now sitting as council, official plan amendment application OP 21-14-5. Spencer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Ryan. The application for official plan amendment OP 21-14-5 affects lands owned by Ronald Wilson, and they're located in the village of Thamesford. Generally, the lands are contained on the west side of 15th line, known as Banner Road, and south of Road 68. And I would just have plate number 6 pulled up on the screen for council. It's probably the best illustration for the purposes of this discussion. In this instance, the applicant is requesting 2 different items through the official plan amendment, one of which is to redesignate the subject lands to low-density residential and medium-density residential. The second part of the request through the OPA is to bring in an additional area of approximately 10.9 acres into the settlement boundary of the village of Thamesford. The whole of Area A, as shown on the screen, is what the focus of the discussion will be on today. As Area B, it's been discussed with the applicant over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, that it's not appropriate at this time to really have any discussion towards bringing those into the village, nor is there any purpose in putting designations on an area shown as Area B. The Humphrey Drain is the water course that currently goes through the property, and that will be outlined in the report, as council will have noted. Humphrey Drain really is quite an important part of this discussion, in that the floodplain area associated with that water course, while it is shown by the Conservation Authority's regulation limits, the confidence in the current flood model is not high, and as such, the Conservation Authority has indicated that they will require an updated flood model prior to any development occurring at an elevation at 283 meters geodetic. So that is outlined in the report, and given that area of concern, it is a major issue. So what we've done through the official plan amendment policy text is we've actually included specific policy direction that should this OPA be approved, there would be a requirement on the applicant to undertake that flood model. So too would there be a requirement for any environmental impact study that the Conservation Authority may require, or the county or township may require. Similarly, council will have noted there's requirements in place for items such as traffic impact, noise and vibration, air quality, and those particular items are due to the fact that this subject property has very close proximity to areas licensed for aggregate extraction. Surrounding land uses are predominantly a mixture of agricultural to the north and west. To the south, we do have recently developed plan of subdivision, and similarly to the east, we have predominantly low-density residential uses. The whole of Area A is approximately 54 acres in size, and I would just emphasize for council that the current extent of Area A that's shown, I believe it's on the plate before this, as being within the settlement, is outlined there kind of in that light purplish color. So the area shown in blue, representing just under 11 acres, is the area that is being proposed for this, what we've called in the report, the rounding out of the village boundary. I would highlight too for council, it's not uncommon for village boundaries to be terminated by way of natural features. I cannot speak to, at the time that the plan for the village of Thamesford was drawn up, why the line was put where it was. It is, wholly reasonable to think that they could have gone in line with the drain at that time, but decided to go where the line currently is in an effort to protect agricultural lands, as that is a large factor here. We would just say from a staff level that we do see the area of 11 acres being marginal agricultural land. It would become difficult to access for the purpose of agricultural production once this property is developed for the purpose of a subdivision. And so we just have outlined that for council's consideration here today. A couple of other things I would highlight. The request to go into low and medium density residential, we do find that to be appropriate. The applicants have prepared planning justification reports. Similarly, we've gone through the exercise and seeing what the needs are for the village of Thamesford, for the township of Zorra, and for the county as a whole. We do know that there is a need for increased density, and the applicant has correspondingly provided a significant portion of the property as being allocated for those purposes. The report itself does outline for council the numbers as far as the overall densities required through low density and for medium density requirements. And the other area I would like to highlight is that As part of the policy, we've included a criteria which we call subdivision design. And the intent of this is that should a developer come forward and wish to develop the property, we don't want them to run into an issue where they say we don't want to terminate the low density here or terminate the medium density here. So through this condition we've got in place in the policy, we actually afford an opportunity for the township and the county to have sole discretion as far as where those boundary lines are. And the effect of that would be if council of the day decides that they would like to see an additional area of medium density closer towards the watercourse, for example, where it's currently shown as low density, respective councils at both Zorra and county council level would be able to have discretion over that and make that call without the requirement of a further application for official plan amendment. As far as the rationale behind both the low and medium density housing types, they're both forms and types that we are supportive of in the village throughout the township and county. The medium density is something that we are seeing more of along the Middleton Street. I would just highlight for council as an example of an area recently developed for medium density residential purposes. Does not have to be townhouse development, for example, it just has to make sure that we hit those minimum targets for units per hectare, units per acre, as outlined in the report. Some of the other comments received as a result of circulation, I did have a couple of phone calls with area residents, general questions and comments about the development itself, about the needs, about the loss of agricultural land. There was nothing to highlight necessarily from any one of those calls in particular. I would note for council there are a couple of area residents in attendance here today that may wish to speak or have questions about the application. The other area of concern, as I mentioned, came from the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority with respect to the Humphrey Drain and its associated area of floodplain, and that, as noted, has been made part of the policy that should the application be supported, no development would occur on these lands until that work has been done. So too, they would be required to do the TIS, the EIS, full stormwater management, functional servicing, all to the satisfaction of the township and the county. Township Public Works and County Public Works did provide preliminary comment based on the proposal. There were no glaring issues that were noted by either. The township did have, through their consultant engineer, provide some comments with respect to the overall proposal and its feasibility. It was suggested that overall the concept does appear to be viable. There's a number of different options as far as how the property does get developed. The other area I would just like to highlight as being a benefit as far as subdivision design, by including the additional just under 11 acres for the purpose of rounding out, it would afford some additional opportunities for flexibility within the design of a subdivision eventually. We want to avoid both Township Public Works and likely County Public Works, although it's less so impacting on number 2. It's more so the impact on Banner Road, number 15, that if we are not afforded that flexibility within an internal road network, we may have increased pressures for a developer looking at having immediate frontages on 15, which we want to avoid. So by including those additional areas, we do think there is a benefit to allow for some flexibility in the road network that's designed. Similarly to the applicants at some point will be required to offer land as parkland dedication. Those lands may be beneficial from a parkland standpoint, and again, very much dependent on the subdivision design. It does become difficult to test this application in that we are receiving today only an application for official plan amendment. There is no corresponding plan of subdivision at this time. There is no corresponding zone changes at this time. So what we are looking at is an area, 54 acres in size, which we do feel is appropriate based on all the feedback received to be designated for both low and medium density residential purposes with many criteria in place for studies and impacts to assess in the future. But at this point in time, staff are supportive of the application. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have on the matter. I do know that the applicant on behalf of the client is here today, Michael Serra from GSP. He is available for questions, should council have any, and there are area residents available as well, and I believe they have some comments that they may wish to ask about the application. Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer. Questions for the planner on the report from council? Councillor Stewart.
I don't think you highlighted this. I just want to make sure, Spencer, but, and I know we're not looking at a subdivision plan that's here for more than just general reference as to sort of schematics of what this could look like as a layout for the subdivision, extending all the way to the full 54 acres. But there are comments throughout, mainly from the township staff, I believe Public Works, about lots fronting onto Banner, line 15th line. Obviously, this current plan right here shows what we don't want. And I know we're not looking at this in terms of approving a subdivision plan, but could you just expand on the concerns and what we would like to see, you know, how township's concerns would be accommodated in a different look here?
Through Mayor Ryan to Councillor Stewart's question, that is correct in that the subdivision, we'll call it a draft subdivision plan on the screen right now. While there are some elements that, on a preliminary note, we would be supportive of, and we do like to see, even the road network, the drawing that council is seeing now is an improved version of versions that we have seen in the past, so there has been some work to get to this point that council is seeing. The frontages along Banner are still problematic. Township Public Works primarily has indicated that there's a desire to avoid that where possible and feasible. And I do think that the area that included by bringing in the additional almost 11 acres will afford some flexibility for the internal road network. So if there's another access point onto Banner, for example, in between the two currently shown, or some other alternative, it could alleviate some of the concerns with all of those, let's say they're townhouses, again, similar to Middleton, that would be fronting on Banner. So we do think there's an opportunity there, and again, we can only assess this subdivision as being a very high level, some sort of schematic as to what would be possible on the property. What may be presented as part of a true draft plan of subdivision application could look entirely different from what's shown on the screen.
Okay, and just to confirm again, what we're talking about here today is, in terms of the official plan amendment, is only the discussion about adding an additional area to the village boundaries. Nothing would be stopping the current owner or a developer for this land to be developed. What portion is currently within the village boundaries as it is right now?
Through the mayor, to Councillor Stewart's question, with respect to the area that's currently within the village boundary, it is delineated by the yellow line shown on the screen, generally speaking. Those lands are currently in a special policy area, so they are not currently designated low density or medium density. This application seeks to put them into those respective designations. So it's not to say that they could be developed today for those purposes, but what I would agree with is that they are currently within the village, and the applicants have justified the appropriateness of putting residential designations on them.
Any other questions for staff on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, Spencer, you referred a few times about possible flooding of the Humphrey Drain, and so I just want to confirm, though it is called a drain, it is an open water course, it's not a covered municipal drain?
Through the mayor to Councillor Mitchell's question, that's correct. It is an open water course, the Humphrey Drain, it's a municipal drain. I would just note that the drain itself did undergo some work not so many years ago in order to accommodate the subdivision to the immediate south. So there was alterations to that water course. There has not been any alterations since that time, but it is reasonable to assume that at some point in the future there could be an application to make changes to that drain as it's currently configured. However, it is currently an open water course.
Any other questions on the report? Does the applicant wish to speak to their application? So you can just come up there. Spencer, you can make sure that mic's on.
Thank you, Spencer, and members of council for taking the time for this application. I would just like to thank the members of the township and the county for their ongoing collaboration and coordination throughout the years for this particular proposal and property. We're excited to bring some much-needed housing development in the area, and that's the majority of what I'd like to say today. If there are any questions or any comments that require any follow-up, please do not hesitate to ask, and I'll be more than happy to provide any answers.
Thanks very much. Questions from council for the applicant? Councillor Mitchell.
On the plate that shows the first rough draft of the potential development, there's two areas marked medium density. So what percentage of the total development area does medium density make up as compared to the low density portion?
Thank you for your question. I believe that being that this is more of a draft preliminary concept for the purposes of this application, roughly about 50% of the area within Area A would be medium density residential, 50% low density residential. Those numbers are subject to further refinements as we continue through the draft plan subdivision process, refining the detailed design and moving from there.
Any other questions for the applicant? Not seeing any. Are there any members of the public, either here or virtually, who wish to speak to the application? Can I get you to just come up? Can I get you to state your name for the record?
Yep. My name is Sean Nye. I live across from the field there. We have no problem with the subdivision going in or with Mr. Wilson applying for all of this. Our issue is with townhouses fronting on Banner Road, 15th line. It looks like there's, I don't know if they're townhouses to be exact, like you did on Middleton Street. I don't understand what the yellow and the brown and would those be townhouses or single detached homes?
So I think at this
Fronting
point
the
it's
15th
not
line.
determined what they would be.
Okay.
Right now they're identified as lots, but I think as council has heard, you know, whether those lots will in fact even be there like that is
Yep.
not what we're approving necessarily today.
Okay.
But I mean, by all means, we're here to hear what your concerns might be, and that might
Yep.
inform what those lots might then be. So,
Yes, and that's a big concern is traffic parking. Has there been a traffic survey done? Are they looking at what tripling the parking on that street's gonna do to Thamesford, the subdivisions that are beyond that are accessed off of Banner Road? Emergency services, I've noticed they're using 15th line a lot to get to those new subdivisions over Middleton Street now that is jam-packed full of cars for doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I'll let Spencer take a crack at answering that.
Yep.
Thank you. They're all great questions. Happy that residents first and foremost have come out today to address these things. This is the entire purpose of a public meeting. So thank you for coming out first and foremost. To the questions that you have, the first thing, we do not know the housing form and type that would be located immediately along Banner. But as outlined in the report, there are concerns from a township staff standpoint with having those frontages there. We want to avoid what currently is the situation on Middleton. It's not to say that there aren't benefits to the way it works on Middleton as far as traffic calming goes for that particular area of the village. At this location, however, that is not something that we want to replicate. So that's where I'm saying that in part, this area that would be brought in potentially to address with perhaps better subdivision design could actually be beneficial in accommodating a different road network to ensure that we don't have lots fronting onto Banner and can keep them fronting onto an internal road network instead.
Next question is, when about would this subdivision start, the construction?
So we have no information and no way of knowing and no way of controlling that. So at a municipal level, what we would do is we approve through the Planning Act what the allowed land uses are.
Mm-hmm.
But then it would be similar to you getting asking for permission to put a garage on behind your house. You have
Yep.
permission to do it.
Yes.
When you do it, whether you ever do it is up to you.
Yep.
You might change your mind
understand
and never do it. There's certainly been planning applications we've considered here that are, I can think of one that's probably at least 5 or 6 years old in the village of Thamesford that got full planning approval and has never progressed at all, so.
Okay. So there's no order to completion of, say, the Cold Springs property before this one will start?
Privately owned land, they get planning permission
Yep.
to do development, and
Okay.
then it is up to those private property owners how they want to proceed with that permission.
Okay.
Spencer?
Yeah. Through the mayor, to the residents' questions too, I'm just remembering, there was a question asked about emergency services. Just to make the public aware, when we receive these applications and circulate them out, they go to a number of different agencies and staff. And emergency services and the fire department locally are circulated on these applications, and we do get comments from them. Some of those comments would be with respect to, at the time of subdivision, they might comment on the location for fire hydrants, for example. At this point in time, for an official plan amendment application, there were comments received with respect to traffic, less so from an emergency services standpoint, but there was a traffic impact study done on these lands, and we've identified further, actually, within the policy that should council approve this today, there is a requirement that a fulsome traffic impact study be done prior to any development occurring on these lands. So I just wanted to add that in to make sure the resident had answers to his questions.
Thank you, Spencer. Did you have any other comments?
Nope, that's all I wanted to know.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Deputy Mayor, well, can I, go ahead, Deputy Mayor Gray.
Can I ask a question of staff that is sparked by comments from the public? Is that,
Sure.
okay. So because what we're looking at is a general concept, and I've heard the comments about parking and hearing the concerns from residents, will we have tools as we move through a planning process for this development to not approve a revised plan that has properties fronting on Banner, or is that once this application has moved through the OPA process, is it just a request that we're able to make in regards to those fronting properties?
Through the mayor to Deputy Mayor Gregg's question, it's a great question, and first and foremost, absolutely, council will have an opportunity through the draft plan of subdivision application process to voice concerns, comments, design elements, all of those things for consideration to ensure that council is frankly getting a product that they are satisfied with for the residents of Thamesford and Zorra. I would just highlight too that one of the areas of concern currently would be all of the lots that would be fronting onto Banner and avoiding that. And from a staff level, we did assess that and look at the appropriateness of putting on low density and medium density designations. We would not have been supportive of putting those designations in place if we did not believe there's an opportunity through an internal road network to accommodate those housing forms and types that correspond with those residential designations.
Are there any other members of the public, either here or virtually, who wish to speak to the application? Okay. Then, moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell. Sorry. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 9:58 a.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then I have moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that council defer application OP 21-14-5 and ask the applicant to work with staff for the purpose of achieving increased density and explore affordable housing opportunities. Councillor Stewart, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, I think my main driver behind this motion is that council has continually had the message of, you know, to avoid creeping into farmland, bringing more density to our currently and especially serviced villages. And I think while there's a ton of reasons that make sense just to arbitrarily change our village boundary in this case, given the natural features, to match up with that, because I know we're not really gonna be left with much viable farmland in between what is currently now village boundary and this drain. I think if someone's asking for that, I think we can ask for something in return that reflects our vision of increasing the density. So what I intend, or I mean by this motion is, the current low and medium densities have a range of units per hectare. And it's possible through discussions that we could have some commitments to the higher range of those densities. While giving up something, we're able to get something in return, essentially is what we're looking for. And then the part about the affordable housing is this property will benefit to the tune of 10 or 11, again, subject to all the other restrictions and Upper Thames comments as well that may come back, 10 or 11 more acres of developable land. And we are also in a time where housing is unaffordable, and finding ways to incorporate affordable housing projects by way of carving out one or two of those acres that are being gained here is something that we're hoping planning staff can have discussions with the applicant on.
Councillor Mitchell is the seconder.
Yeah, I was of mixed opinion when I looked at this application. As a farmer and a longtime member of the Oxford County Federation of Agriculture, I am opposed to taking any prime farmland out of production. This is only an extra 11 acres, but loss of farmland often happens in bits and pieces, 10 acres here, 20 acres there, and it adds up quite quickly. It's also been the consensus of council, which I completely agree with, that we promote development within the villages of Thamesford and Embro with the land that we've already designated before we expand the development areas, the settlement areas of these our two main villages. And there is still significant land within the Thames Springs, the Maple Leaf subdivisions, and as well as we're promoting infill. On the other hand, it does make, from a design standpoint, more sense to use the drain as a natural boundary as opposed to the artificial boundary, which was the line drawn on a map. It's been referenced that it is only 11 acres, which means that it's, as far as a viable field in today's agriculture with the size of equipment, there's issues about whether that's an efficient farm operation. There's also possibility of conflict with cropping that close to a development, noise, dust, pesticide spread, and also this land would not be possible for any type of livestock development due to the MDS restrictions. I agree with Councillor Stewart that this is an opportunity where there's benefit on both sides. If we approve the extra 11 acres being included in this project, that is definitely a huge advantage to the developer. But also, if we can increase the amount of medium density housing, that's a huge advantage to the municipality and to the residents of the area. So I think this is an opportunity where we need to get a little bit more deeper into what's being planned here. We've talked a fair bit about the issue of the frontages on Banner Road, and those will be dealt with. But I would, rather than say no to this project at this point, this application, I'm not in favor of doing that. I think it has merit. I'm not in favor of approving it right now because I want to see more information of where we're going on the medium density. So I'm supporting the motion from Councillor Stewart to defer and ask the applicants to come back with more information for us.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor Grady.
Yeah, this is this is a hard one. I think I came at it similar to Councillor Mitchell. And it's incredibly difficult to look at this because it is just the OPA. And it is not, we're not at the point of looking at the details of it. We speak frequently and passionately around this horseshoe and at the county level about preservation of ag lands, and we have an absolute responsibility to that. I'm happy for the development that's been happening in Thamesford with the brownfield redevelopment of the Cold Springs property, and the high density, that's the medium to higher density that's going into the village. There's a lot of pushback in the community because they don't like the aesthetic of the high density, but it's been great having conversations with people to better understand the more we can house within our serviced villages. Not only is it better for our property tax bill because the infrastructure costs are shared in a more cost-effective way, but it is also, for every house that goes in the existing village, that is a parcel outside of our village boundary that we get to keep. This one's tricky because a lot of people didn't realize that the majority of this is already within our boundary. This was what has been designated for future growth for quite some time, in the same way that Cold Springs was designated for future growth quite a while ago as well. Part of my concern is that it feels in the village like there's just this real rapid burning through all of the future developable lands. And so, my concern for preservation of agricultural resources isn't so much the 11 acres. I think there's great justification for why that 11 acres would benefit for development. But that in developing all of our future developable lands, that then there's pressures to expand that village boundary into other viable farmlands that are not landlocked by natural features, that are not, restricted by close setbacks from development. With this application, we don't have tools to say no to this because of those concerns, but I think what we are able to achieve through Councillor Stewart's motion is best use of these lands with that extra 11 acres, that as a result of higher density for more housing, as a result of best addressing the needs today and in the future of Thamesford and Zorra and Oxford County residents, that then the lifespan of this as a housing supply for us will extend a little bit longer into the future, and which then in turn allows for us to not have those pressures to sprawl out in other directions around the village. So for those reasons, I will be, I anticipate, pending further comments, I anticipate being in support of this motion for the applicant to look for, some tweaks to look at what else can go in there to increase that density. And I also look forward to, as we move through the process with whomever follows this file moving forward, whoever the owner or developer ends up being, that through other areas of the process we will have opportunities to work to continue to have this development be an expansion of the great community that we are.
Anyone else? Councillor Finch.
For me, when I was looking over this report, my biggest thing was the boundaries. When we were going through sitting in these seats, we told everybody we weren't going to move the boundaries and we were going to go up instead of out. So, but with everything that Spencer said and my fellow councillors, I see that there could be benefit. But again, like Paul said, you take 10 acres here, 10 acres there. I don't know. I'm happy to go with the deferral and see what can come of this.
First, I want to thank, I don't normally thank staff for their reports, but I think in this case, this is like a unusual report and complex application and a very detailed report that explains the ins and outs of what we're considering here. I do think that the roundout, similar to what Councillor Finch said, I think all of us, and I certainly include myself, have said we should not be expanding any settlement area boundaries until we absolutely have to, and we should be ensuring that we get every unit within those boundaries that we can. That being said, the 11 acres here that's outside the village boundary, if not included, is really going to be landlocked, either from the point of view of agriculture or future development, if it's not included. But that being said, I think we absolutely should take that opportunity to extract every bit of value for the community that we can of expanding that boundary. And I don't know what more increased density is achievable, but I think we should ask the proponent, the applicant, to say, well, what more can you give in this community, in Thamesford and Zorra and Oxford? I think we want to make sure at all levels in all of our communities that we're making, you know, every bit of use of every bit of land that we have before we expand those boundaries. I think that's the right thing to do, is to further explore that and see what's the most we can get out of this. I do like the idea of exploring, are there affordable housing opportunities? Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. I think we would be missing an opportunity to not say, explore that. Is there an opportunity here? So I think that it is the right thing to do, to recommend deferral, to explore those more, and see if we can get further justification for our residents of expanding a village boundary, which again I think is reasonable for us to consider, as long as we extract the maximum value for our community out of that 11 acres. There's certainly value to the applicant in those 11 acres, they wouldn't be proposing it. So I think this is the right thing to do. Anyone else? Spencer?
Thank you. The one area I just wanted to kind of reiterate for council's consideration is the condition that we have included, titled subdivision design, could apply, and this is a hypothetical, but if council is looking at the 3 blocks shown in yellow at the north end of the drawing, the 3 clusters of currently low-density residential development, should it be the desire of council of the day that that area become medium density, the criteria we've embedded into the policy affords council that flexibility and the sole discretion of local council and county council, that discretion to say, yeah, that area now is medium density, or for example, lots that are currently shown along the water course, we've extended that and brought that into medium, and the rest is low. I am very cautious of moving a direction which sees, basically would have the effect of having no low-density development in a village. And I really highlight the fact that Thamesford is a village and will remain a village. And medium density, important as it is, I think there is still a desire and there still is a need from a planning perspective to have a mix of housing forms and types. The PPS directs us to plan accordingly and not only work towards approving high-density development, for example. We look to bring forward proposals which incorporate mixed uses and different lot fabrics, different housing forms and types. And certainly, I would be cautious to see a development come forward which doesn't show any singles, for example. Whether it's the retiring farmer looking to locate into the village, these are not estate lots. Planning support by no means are in favor of creating any estate lots. But I do think it's really important that council keep in mind the value of maintaining some low-density residential land supply in the village, especially with what we do anticipate as coming to fruition for the Cold Spring site as being a very dense development. Just for council's consideration, I just wanted to highlight that before your final deliberations.
Don?
Just to touch upon what Spencer's mentioned, so the Kingwood site is looking at approximately 1,134 units. Only 30 lots will be single-family dwellings. So with what's left on the lot on the subdivision to the south, I believe there's 100 lots left for low-density residential. So once that's gone, there would be very, very little low-density residential for the village. So it really eliminates that housing stock from options that people wanting to move into Thamesford may have. So there needs to be some balance between the medium density and the low density, and that's why something of what's being proposed here meets the test of the OP It exceeds the density requirements, but it still gives the potential people moving into Thamesford some options for what they may want to buy.
Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, at least my intention here is not necessarily to replace low with medium to increase the density. It's to possibly stay a similar split to what is currently, shown in draft, obviously, here on this plan between low and medium, but make sure that we are towards the higher ranges of the low and medium densities within those ranges that are acceptable. That's at least from my perspective what I mean by this motion.
So I guess, those 3 yellow blocks of low density, but my understanding, that a future council has the power to make them medium. But I guess the thing is, we don't know if those 3 blocks are even going to exist on what we eventually see in front of us. It could be a different thing. So, being the control freak that I am, I would say, if we want higher density, whatever that higher looks like, is whatever, which would be obviously up to the applicant too, whether they were willing to work with that. I think we should say it. I think it's appropriate to say it now that we want it. And the other thing I would say is, this council hasn't seen an application from Kingwood for the Maple Leaf properties, and if we're going to consider each application on its own merit, we don't know what we're going to see there. We know what we hope we're going to see, but we don't know. And this is the one that's in front of us today. And I think I'm comfortable with this saying, achieve increased density. What does increased density look like? Let's see. Let's see if we can extract, a couple more units, as the deputy mayor said, a couple more units within the boundary. That then means less pressure to go outside that boundary in the future. I think it's still the right directional way to go. Anyone else? Karen did suggest to me something that, much as I hate friendly amendments, I'm going to suggest that we do, and that is to just change the wording of this motion. Instead of that council defer application, that council recommend that Oxford County Council defer application, because as this is an OPA amendment, of course, this council does not actually have the decision-making authority on it. Oxford County Council, Spencer.
Thank you. To that particular point, should council defer the application today, I've been instructed by my director to cancel the meeting scheduled for the 23rd or 24th of April for county council, just so that's made clear.
Thank you. Is there any objection to the mover and the seconder to just tweaking that? All right. So then, per that friendly amendment then, the motion would be moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that council recommend that Oxford County Council defer application OP 21-14-5 and ask the applicant to work with staff for the purpose of achieving increased density and explore affordable housing opportunities. So again, mover and the seconder are okay. Does anybody else wish to speak to Deputy Mayor Grigg?
I just have a question of clarification for the planner. So I already forget the language. The 3 blocks of low density at the top, if we get to the plan of subdivision and we say we actually want those, if they still exist, we want those to be medium density instead of low density, we have the ability to do that at that time. So with what we have right now, so the applicant has put forward a 50-50 split, more or less. If the applicant came back with a 60-40 split for 60% medium and 40% low density, functionally, is there any difference between those 2 applications in terms of what we have to deal with at plan subdivision application time?
Through the mayor to Deputy Mayor Grigg's question, the way I envision this happening is, should council defer the application today, what I anticipate the discussion to be between the applicant and myself and the planning department would really have the effect of, rather than discussing it from a standpoint of a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split, would be based on a numerical overall net density achieved by the site. So given the comments I've heard today from council, I would say that council has a strong interest in exploring the higher density range of both the low and medium density designations. So if medium density is 22 to 50 units, maybe council wants to see a minimum net density achieved that is 40 rather than 23. Something like that is based on what I've heard from council today, something that I think the applicant would request to speak with staff about. That's just hypothetical, but to the question, there is still plenty of opportunity for council to review these things when it comes to the draft plan of subdivision, the overall layout, the road network, and obviously at some point the area shown for parkland dedication. All of those various things would be addressed through the draft plan.
Anyone else? I'm going to read it again, call the question. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that council recommend that Oxford County Council defer application OP 21-14-5 and ask the applicant to work with staff for the purpose of achieving increased density and explore affordable housing opportunities. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Just gonna make a note here. All right, and then we are going to jump down then to 9.3A, Financial Services, as we have a staff member who's not normally located in this office here to present. So we're going to jump down to that one so they can present and then go back to their office and get back to work. So we're going to jump to 9.3, Financial Services A, Report 2024-039 from the Capital Planning Analyst regarding establishing an asset retirement obligations policy for the Township. Connor Brennan attending, and apparently Connor walks by my office at the county all the time, yet we have not met until today. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you if you want to highlight anything for council before I ask them for questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mayor and councilors. So yeah, as Mayor mentioned, Connor Brennan from Oxford County. So I've been with Zorra working on the asset management plan since about September, and we're bringing the asset management plan to council in either late May or early June. And this is the asset retirement obligations. It's required from the province for all municipalities with year ends after April 1st, 2022, which is why we have this in January 1st, 2023 for this year-end process. So essentially this would be end-of-life obligations for assets that have a hazardous nature or would need to be rehabilitated back to a specific state. So the ones identified in Table 1 there, the majority are asbestos. There is one lead paint in Harrington Hall, and then I'm sure some of the eyes got widened at the number for the gravel pit there. So I can speak specifically to that. So that was the 1.39 million was a factor of how big the gravel pit is, multiplied by, we had an estimate of $7.50 a square meter to cover and rehabilitate the gravel pit. Still getting estimates from gravel companies on that. We did have a much lower figure for Township of Southwest Oxford Council yesterday to close theirs, and so chances are this will be lower, maybe in the $800,000 range, but essentially this is a figure to grade, seed, and plant trees and overall rehabilitate the gravel pits, and this is a dollar figure if it was closed tomorrow. And the idea of the gravel pit is, you know, it's going to be used and closed partially as it goes on, so it will be, this number will be changed on an annual basis based on how much was closed over the previous year. And then the other asbestos figures, lead paint, those were all done from our consultant, Facility Risk Solutions, that did the building condition assessments that were completed in November. There's no final report as part of that process, but that all of that information will be coming to council when we do the asset management plan for all the facilities. And that gave us an idea of, yeah, where the AROs were, which was only identified in these, 5 or 6 buildings. Scout Hall was not part of that BCAs. And there are a few smaller locations like washrooms at parks and a few smaller locations like that that didn't have BCAs done. But most of them shouldn't have asbestos. Scout Hall, just due to the age and nature of it. would certainly have asbestos. The 25,000 there is just an estimate for now, and that'll be completed as part of the year-end obligations, or sorry, year-end financial process. In terms of other AROs that were looked at, and the township either did not have any or are not township assets and are instead owned by the county, all the lead pipes would be part of the water infrastructure that is dealt with at the county council. Certainly no landfills, no wastewater facilities, anything like that. And then smaller ones like electronic waste is just a standard process we don't need to put into the year-end books. Yeah, and annual review, it'll be assessed every year, so if other asbestos AROs are found, they would just be added to the year-end process. I would like to identify page 9 at the bottom of this report. There's a decision tree that goes over AROs versus contaminated sites. Contaminated sites similar to what you were talking about with the Maple Leaf plant, the brownfield rehabilitation, that would be completely separate from this ARO. This is only for you know, some of the assets that we've talked about, asbestos, lead paint, separate from chemical contamination and gasoline and things of that nature. And then, yeah, in terms of the amortization, or the AROs are on the books over the asset's useful life, and when a asset is either sold, a facility is either sold or retired, the financial statement will include a gain or loss for the difference between actual cost of settling the ARO and the recorded liability. So for instance, if we get that gravel pit figured down to $1 million, and by the end it only costs us $800,000, there'll just be a $200,000 loss on that, but it's non-cash, so it's just a financial statement recording on the books. And yeah, there's no money in reserves for this, and there's no other changes to reserve or anything like that. It's just acceptance of the policy, and then we'll do this as part of the year-end process. Any questions?
Thanks. Questions from council? Councilor Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks. On page 3 of the report under financial implication, it states that the asset retirement of obligations policy is similar to amortization. So how is it similar and how is it different?
Yeah, so it's similar just in that it's on the books over the asset's useful life, and then it's different because it's a liability, and amortized assets are you know, an asset that brings, you know, a benefit to the township. So it's just a liability that, you know, does have to be paid off at the when the asset is retired.
Okay. My other question is, how is this policy different from the expected replacement costs of asset type of budgeting that we use in the 10-year capital budget projections?
Yeah, so for instance, say the Union or the Harrington Hall, the $6,500 for lead paint, and I think the $5,500, something like that, for asbestos. To replace all of Harrington Hall, it's going to cost $500,000. That's the actual replacement cost, and then this is just a liability on that asset. But to replace a new one, we're obviously not going to have lead paint or asbestos, so it's just it's a completely separate number.
So what I'm hearing is this amortization is kind of a tax thing where you're allowed to write down the value of property for tax purposes. Replacement value budgeting is planning ahead so that we have money in place to replace things. This is kind of a third category, that new legislation where we have to say this is our planning of what the liability is of this. It's an asset now, but when we're done with it, it becomes a liability. So there's similarities to both, but they're not gonna replace either of.
No,
this
they're not
new
going
thing
to
is not
replace these. We
replacing
just
either of
have
the
to
other.
deal with the liability either when we sell the asset, tomorrow, or when we retire the asset. We just have to deal with the liability then.
And we need to, if we were to sell something, we need to notify the potential buyer of where we're at on this policy, whereas you don't have to tell them how much amortization is off it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Or
no, but
anything
yes,
else.
certainly we would need to notify the buyer of any AROs that we have,
Okay.
including the asbestos and that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thanks very much. I think this is another example of, sort of a policy that council considers that's not sexy or exciting, but I think that residents should take confidence that this is like responsible governance and financial management, right? I mean, whether the cost for the gravel pit ends up being $800,000 or $1.4 million, it is a bill that will inevitably come due, and to just sort of, not look at that because it's a couple of decades away is, I mean, legislatively required that we do look at it now, but I mean, it's just irresponsible to do. So I'm sure, people aren't happy at the idea that they're being, that they will ultimately be taxed to plant trees on a retired gravel pit in 20 years. But at the same time, like, somebody's going to have to pay to do that. And we should look at that and say, like, let's have a financial plan for that. Otherwise, some future council will have to hand a surprise tax bill to some future resident for a thing that should not have been a surprise. So I think I would just encourage council, and obviously any residents watching this, to have those kinds of discussions with residents. Like, there's some stuff that council does that we tax people for and that we manage that, are not particularly exciting to do, but it is, but we should do them, because otherwise some future council is going to say, well, we can't do that recreation project because now we got to spend $800,000 on rehabilitating the gravel pit. Well, shouldn't you have known that? Well, we shoulda, but anyway, so we're doing that thing that we should have done, and this is the responsible way to do it, even though it's not necessarily that exciting for a resident to look at. Any other questions? Thanks very much, Connor.
Thank you.
I should have pulled this out while you were talking. 9.3A, moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that council approve the asset retirement obligations policy 500-08 as attached to report 2024-39, and that it be included as part of the township's asset management program. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And then back up to reports from Public Services Department, 8.1 Roads Division, Report 2024-043 from the Director of Public Services. That's going to take a while to get used to. Regarding a Roads Division monthly report. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Thank you. No, nothing to highlight at this time.
Steve, I may be jinxing us for an April snowstorm, but I'm interested in the impact of a relatively mild winter with not much snow. We budget $100,000 a year for your department for overtime, and I think much of that is used for winter control. Haven't been much need for winter control this year, but in its place, the guys have been doing a lot of road grading. So what's the impact on specifically overtime that the relatively mild winter has had?
Thanks to Diane, the Director of Finance, for providing the actuals to that. Right now, we're sitting at about half on overtime paid out. Now, remember that our year starts January 1, ends December 31st. So if we don't have an early start to next winter, then we should be sitting pretty good. But if winter starts in October, then we'll be back up to our normal overtime rate.
So we'll know better next January.
December 31st.
But as of right now, it looks
Yes.
pretty good. And I just want to, for members of the public thinking, we're saving a lot of money because we didn't have to plow much snow.
Yeah, to date we have. Yes.
We're still out there doing things.
Yes. Some of the things we're doing don't require as much overtime, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
We did use some overtime getting caught up on some road conditions for grading, but regular grading is happening within regular hours right now, and we'll
Yep.
continue to do so until we get things taken care of. So.
And along that same line, what's our stockpile of sand and gravel now compared to what your estimate?
Yes, thank you. That's we've used about 50 to 60% of what we this year what we usually use. Right now, we've probably got about 2,500 ton of sand in there. Last year at this time, we had about 1,000 ton. So we started out with about 4,000 ton.
So potentially some savings there.
Yes.
When we restock.
Yes, 100%. When we first started using the new sand salt facility, we stocked up with 4,000 ton right off the bat. Last winter season, we used about 3,000 ton. This year, we're sitting almost a little over half of that again this year. So.
And my last question on this topic is the ZMF. We've had a few months now with in operation. The production from the solar panels and the geothermal wells, have they been meeting expectations, or are we potentially looking at expanding one or both of those?
It's really hard to tell. This winter, especially December and January, we had very gloomy weather, so the solar panels weren't producing much power. So it's really hard to tell until we get at least 1 year under our belt, so we have some comparable data to see how we're working with that. The geothermal, we didn't have a real good test, so it wasn't a real extremely cold winter. We had a good cold snap there the last week that was a good test for it, and it worked really, really well. So we're happy with that. But like I say, it's going to take us at least a year to get some good comparable data to know what, if we're any need to expand on the solar or find efficiencies within the building to make the existing solar more efficient.
So yeah, I look forward to that report after a year, but no red flags so far.
Right. No red flags today. No.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Any other questions on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2024-043 from the Director of Public Works Services be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.2, Recreation and Facilities Division, report 2024-041 from the Manager of Recreation and Facilities regarding Recreation Monthly Report. Sophia, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Nothing to highlight, thanks.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Stewart.
Maybe it's in here, but what's the timeline on the turnaround for the report from the consultant on fees?
So they estimated about 8-week turnaround from when they got started. So initially we were looking at end of May. It has taken us a little more time to gather some data that they need to get the outcomes we're looking for. So, but still on target, end of May, mid-June.
Councilor Mitchell.
No questions, but a couple comments. No questions because everything I wanted to know was in the report. But I do want to thank you for including the BMA proposal in your report. It's very detailed, and I think it's helpful for us to get that information and kind of digest it ahead of time so we know what they're looking at. And then once we get the report, we can actually look at the data they collected. If the report is as impressive as their RFQ, it's going to be money well spent, because I was very impressed with not only the people that are doing, but what they laid out. And I think it really goes along with what we've been wanting to know for as long as we've been sitting at this horseshoe. And as far as money well spent, I noticed we budgeted 30,000 and they're charging us 15,000, so we're already ahead of the game on that. So just want to make those comments.
Anyone else? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2024-041 from the Manager of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? I just wanted to make a comment that, well, again, I obviously love the data in the report, but also the survey results from residents on the camp is just excellent. Like, there's not much better measure of value for tax dollars for fees than those kinds of survey results. So well done to everybody in recreation for delivering that and for doing the survey to find out so that we can, if possible, do better than that next year. So, anybody else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then reports from Corporate and Protective Services Department, 9.1 Emergency Services, report 2024-037 from the Fire Chief regarding monthly activities. And Chief, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Not at present.
Any questions from council on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Chief, I like long reports with lots of detail, and I especially like long reports and lots of detail from the fire chief. So thank you for not over all the detail that was put in this report. I have to admit, I was a little nervous of the brevity of your first report, but you'd only be on the job for a week, so I cut you some slack on that one. I do like the new incident charts that you're included in there, and I do have a question about that. And I really, really like the term return on investment, which was in the financial implications. I think we often think, especially some of our fire service is totally cost, but I think we're also investing in the municipality and in the money we spend on it as well. So my first question, and I ask this as a former firefighter and as the former alternate CEMC, what's your plan in the first part of your report talking about incorporating for firefighters more involved in the emergency management part of the department?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. I have spent a significant amount of time and money diving into emergency management personally. My hope is that fire service members will have the same interest. And the design of the standard operating guideline document that I'm creating is to allow any firefighter the ability to pick up the document and answer any questions that they may have. It's my way of imparting what I've learned to the department, but it's also my way to get feedback from the department on what I think good ideas are, because I'm fairly new here and they are not.
Yeah, I think in the past, fire department's been one thing, and emergency management's been, as far as the boots on the ground, has been quite separate. But when an emergency happens, the fire department is going to be the key responders to it. So I think it's good to get more people involved, and I'm interested to see how that's going to work out. My other question is the new benchmark charts that included. Could you just, if we could bring them up and just go over, because there was a couple things that I didn't fully understand in there, and I'm interested in the concept of successful meeting standards successfully, and I think that is in these charts. So if you could just explain that a little bit more to us.
Thank you, Councillor. The reports that you've received in the past were very complete, and they were very good. They had the number of responses and what those responses were. This report is it's my attempt to create a benchmark to decide when a new recruitment might be necessary. So if you look at the top portion, it tells you the different sizes of areas that appear within the township. This is taken from an NFPA document 1720, which is the standard for volunteer fire service. And they have recommendations on responses basically as minimums, and we are currently meeting those minimums. What I wanted to do was lay that out, and in a lot of cases, it appears here as if we've not met the minimum, but the success that we're looking at is rural calls, and it's not reasonable to ask 10 firefighters to be on a very rural call in 10 minutes. It's not something that we can do. So it's just a way for us to look and make sure that we are meeting some standard, and to have the edge of the cliff, as it were, to decide when we need to adjust and improve.
So the first step of making any changes is collecting the data of what's going on now, and that's what you're approaching here.
Yes.
So, that's it for my questions. But a couple of comments. I think we're seeing the benefit of a fresh set of eyes. What I saw in this report was that the chief is taking a look at the whole operation of the department, and as he said, as he's new, he has the benefit not only of being new, but of his background of many other areas to take a fresh look at these things. And I think there's big benefit to that. The challenge will be if whatever changes you implement is going to be selling them to them, because believe me, our firefighters have a lot of ownership of their halls and their procedures. But on a personal note, the one thing I really like to see in your report was that you're moving on possibly adjusting response areas both within the township and with other municipalities. That's something I've been pushing for at least a decade. It's fallen through the cracks a number of times, so I'm glad to see that was included as well.
Any other questions on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2024-037 from the fire chief be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? Councillor Stewart.
Just to make a comment similar to Councillor Mitchell there, and I could have said the same thing for the rec report as well, where quite often we refer to, well, staff and council refer to the road needs study to give us guidance on making decisions on how we're spending taxpayer money. And it's because we have data that we can easily make those decisions, and we're not, it's not arbitrary, it's a process. And I think the BMA report for the rec side is going to be the start of gathering data that we can then use and build upon, and I see the same thing happening on the fire service, so it's very encouraging.
Yeah, I was going to say almost exactly the same thing, that, you know, better fire response is better, but we shouldn't just tax more to do better, because how do you, there's no demonstration of value there. Like, how much more do you tax for how much better? And so I love my data, I love measurables, I love analysis, but this is the right way to do this, is to say, well, you know, is council, are residents happy with these response times? Do we think this is good? And if we do, then there's our justification for it. And if we don't, then we say, well, what do we want to change? How many more firefighters do we want there? How much faster? What does that cost? Are our residents willing to pay that? And I think that's the way we should do, as you said, every service. We should attempt to measure, whether it's a roads needs study or a recreation report or fire, is to say, you know, well, let's measure this stuff and find out. You only, you know, we measure what matters, and when we don't measure a thing, we're basically saying that it doesn't really matter, and that's certainly not the case when it comes to fire. We know that our residents value it. So I think this is amazing. This is the way council should be analyzing that fire service, to say, like, are we happy on behalf of residents with the service we're delivering? And I think, frankly, you know, in the absence of this kind of data, do we really know? And now I think we'll know. So, very happy with this. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.2, Building Drainage and Bylaw Services Report 2024-035 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent on monthly activities. Mike, is there anything you want to highlight in that report?
Nothing at this time.
Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
Mike, refresh me, because we've had a number of drainage reports and come to us recently. The tender for the 25th line drain, is that up to us to pay that full amount, or is that also apportioned out to other landowners?
That will get apportioned out to other landowners, anyone using that drain. Yep.
Okay, so we're not on the hook for the whole.
Not all of it, no.
Okay.
Anyone else? Questions on the report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2024-035 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.2B, Report 2024-036 from the Bylaw Enforcement Officer regarding a departmental update. Karen, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
No, thanks.
Questions from council on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2024-036 from the Bylaw Enforcement Officer be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Financial Services, we've covered 9.3A, so 9.3B, Report 2024-038 from the Tax Collector Deputy Treasurer regarding the 2023 year-end tax report and property tax arrears. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
No, I don't. I don't have anything else to add.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
Diane, there was 13 warning letters sent out for 17 properties. So does that mean that there's some landowners that are in arrears on more than one property?
That's correct.
Okay. And these payment arrangements that we're making with to get these, are they generally paid up within a few months, or do they sometimes drag out for several years to get these arrears taken care of?
So the township works with each of the property owners, and depending on the value of the outstanding amount and the property owner's financial burden, we set up a schedule that works for them, so that our intent is not to own the property, but to work with them and get them back into a favorable position.
Anyone else? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2024-038 from the Tax Collector Deputy Treasurer be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.3C, report 2024-040 from the Tax Collector Deputy Treasurer regarding 2023 tax adjustments. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight in there for council?
No, nothing to add.
Questions from council? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that council authorize a total of $45,871.56 for the write-off of taxes for Section 357 and minutes of settlement processed in 2023 for the township, county, and school boards in the amounts of $18,450.36, $13,542.02, and $13,879.18 respectively. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.3D, report 2024-042 from the Director of Finance regarding the 2023 annual building department financial report. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
No, nothing to add.
Questions from council? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that council receive report number 2024-042 entitled 2023 Annual Building Department Financial Report as information, and that council authorize the transfer of 2023 surplus funds of $60,726 to the Building Department Reserve Fund in accordance with Section 7 of the Ontario Building Code Act. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.3E, report 2024-029 from the Director of Finance regarding the 2023 Development Charges Reserve Annual Report. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
No, nothing to add.
Questions from council on the report? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that report 2024-029 from the Director of Finance be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Almost makes you think of a consent agenda. 9.4 Legislative Services, report 2024-044 from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding memorandum of understanding for proposed elementary school in Thamesford. Dawn, is there anything you want to highlight for council in that before I ask them for questions?
No, I'd leave it open for questions.
Questions from council? Councilor Mitchell.
The $3 million price tag, is that full cost of a full-size gymnasium, or is that just for the expansion to take it from an elementary-sized gymnasium to a full-size?
That would be the township's cost to add the additional square footage to make it a full-size gymnasium. So the school board would be responsible for the construction of the elementary school-sized gymnasium.
Okay, so it's just basically half a gymnasium for $3 million.
Correct.
Okay. And in the report, it says we could pay for this through development charges. How long would it take us to raise $2.7 million of development charges that could be put against this, because not all our development charges could go to this project at the current projections of our development?
That will all depend on the number of houses being built, but we can borrow from the development charges and then we would repay it. So then that cash flow would come from the township's own financial burden.
So, based on the report that we just looked at, development charges, for Parks and Recreation for the last year, we took in $41,634. Then we had some interest of $75.22. So let's say $50,000 a year in development charges that we can dedicate to Parks and Recreation, which I presume that would be the part that comes out for this. And my calculations with that would be at $2.7 million at $50,000 a year would take us 54 years to build, to get through development charges. Is that a reasonable presumption, or is?
It's reasonable. We have to take in consideration that development charges will be increased in this year, so the rates will go up, but it's still, yes, based on your calculation, it will still take a very long time.
Okay, very long time. And then, okay, thanks for pulling that up. I was interested in the total square footage we're looking at here. And if you look at just the big number, community gym, school gym, we're like 3,607 square feet each. But then if you add the other storage, the office, the change rooms, stage, the vestibule, so in our part of the gym, and I included the community, the extended community lobby, as well as the office and the storage there. That comes to a total of 4,485 square feet, which would be 46% of the total. So the scary number to me was that at $3 million, that works out to $669 per square foot. In our next report, we're going to see that we just built the ZMC, or we're finishing building the ZMC, which to me seems like, I know they're different buildings, but the gymnasium is basically a box. The ZMC is much more complicated than that, and we're at $349 per square foot on it. So what the school board's proposing is that we pay per square footage 92% more than what we've just spent on another building. So my comment on that is, yeah, this is a very interesting concept. It's something we want to pursue. But I think early in the next round of discussions is to tell the school board, knock at least $1 million off that price tag before we go any further on this, because I don't understand why we would be paying on a per square footage basis almost 100% more than on a building we've just built.
Any other questions on the report? Don, did you want to?
So that was a worst case number that we used. They've been anticipating something around $450 a square foot. based on their past projects, but we've also included in that $3 million some upgrades to the sports field too, so it's not all directed towards the gym. So we'll have some more definitive costs once and if they tender this job. So we'll be able to actually pinpoint what would be attributable to the gym as opposed to a sports field.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better, because when I looked at that number, good idea, but financially, if it's going to take us 50 years to pay for it, some good ideas just don't work. So, yeah, go ahead and continue down the process, get more information, more dollar values, but these are big numbers. You know, $3 million to the Thames Valley School Board is a drop in the bucket, but it's a lot of money for Little Zorra Township.
Any other questions on the report? Deputy Mayor Greg.
In the report, there's a legal cost to prepare that would be an unbudgeted expenditure. Would that be asked for approval from council once an announcement has been made by the ministry, or is that being asked for at this time?
We would likely wait till the announcement from the ministry.
Anyone else?
And my understanding is that announcement would then trigger a lot of very furious, like a fury of action behind the scenes in terms of what's going to have to happen from the township, from the school board, in order to see this project move forward. If there's a timeline constraint, is there benefit to having something approved in principle ahead of time, or would staff call an emergency council meeting if they're needing approvals for this funding with a tighter turnaround? Like, I have concern that if there's an announcement tomorrow, that if we're waiting 2 weeks to approve this, that do you anticipate that 2 weeks could be a concern in terms of giving all sides the right information to be able to be ready to move forward if it is the right proposal?
We could look at our legal budget to see if there's any room within that, because we haven't typically scheduled any specific projects under legal services, so if there is room, we could operate under that.
Anyone else? Yeah, I would certainly agree with Councillor Mitchell. It's not a secret in anybody who works in any level of government in Ontario that school projects tend to be high-priced, let's say. I'm certainly confident that our municipal staff could certainly build a similar building for a lesser price than what school boards typically build schools for. I think that's a kind of an open secret in government in Ontario. So I would certainly agree that, you know, we need to. It's going to be one of the challenges and the opportunities of this is that if they want to partner with us to do this, and I agree, like, it's a good idea to explore, but part of that partnering is going to be, you know, we don't just write a blank check for this partnership. We need to, you know, we need to have real conversations about what would cost us to build a gym. I think the flip side of that is we need to be realistic about it too, in that you know, we're going to pay the incremental costs. We're not going to pay mobilization costs. We're not going to pay land costs, et cetera, to get a gym. So, you know, swings and roundabouts, but I think it absolutely has to be part of the conversation. You know, are we sure this is competitively done and, you know, and defendable from a municipal perspective, not just a school board perspective, who of course has only a single funder, and that's the Ministry of Education, not the taxpayers of the Township of Zorra. Not directly, anyway. Anyone else? Councillor Mitchell.
And that's my fear. We're the Dalmatian sitting next to the Labrador Retriever, and I hope we don't get slobbered on too much, because they, as you say, they're big. They have a reputation that things cost a whole lot of money. We're little. Hopefully our reputation is that we do things financially, and it's, I think we have to be very careful that we don't get steamrolled by the big dog in this situation. Certainly, as I said, an idea that's worth pursuing, but it has to be financially feasible for us to, we can't tie up all our recreation development charges for the next 50 years because we want to do a project with the school board.
Anyone else? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2024-044 from the Chief Administrative Officer be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And report 2024-045 from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding Zorra Municipal and Child Care Center project. Dawn, is there anything you want to highlight for council there?
Just on page 2, we're looking at a potential move-in date now of May 23rd. In speaking with a contractor yesterday, the child care should be fully complete within 1 month from today. So they will have their time frame to put whatever they need within the building to have it ready for occupancy with children by June 1st.
Questions from council? So June 1st would mean the site would be completely finished and turned over, paved and landscaped and ready for people to drive up and kids to get out of the car and go into childcare.
It should be ready by the time we move in for all of that. But just what the child care needs to make sure that they've got everything in order.
Questions from council on the report? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that report 2024-0545 from the Chief Administrative Officer be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? I guess I would just comment that I'm just very happy to see that while there have been, change orders and additions, that we're still coming in at, on a dollar per square foot level, lower than realistic comparators is a good thing to see. I think we did this project in a different way from the outset, and I know from, again, I've said this before, but I think it bears saying again that, with the change orders, it looks like these are overages, but when you actually look at the net value on a dollars per square foot basis, it's showing that there's value in doing it a different way, and that all that matters in the end is the ultimate bill. If the ultimate bill is lower, then, a change order resulting in increased cost isn't necessarily an actual overage. So I think that's, we'll see when the final bill comes due, but I think so far we're seeing that there's value in that. Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I think the change orders were because we went design and build, which gave us more flexibility as we went through, as opposed to having a set architect plan that started out, where in that case, as we saw with the ZMF, those change orders really hurt, whereas this, we knew going in that there was going to be things that changed as we went along, which were going to cost us extra money.
So I think one of the lessons learned for that on our next design build would be having lump sum allowances in up front, so we wouldn't have as many change orders, and that would mean that we wouldn't be paying the markup on the change order. So there definitely is some lessons learned in going design build, making use of those allowances. So it's cost us some money in the markups, definitely, but it's something we've learned.
Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that report 2024-045 from the Chief Administrative Officer be received and filed for information purposes only. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Correspondence requiring direction, 10A. I have moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that council direct staff to contact Southwestern Public Health to review any alcohol-related policies within the municipality. Is there any discussion? Deputy Mayor Grigg.
In my former role on Calathumpian, I had the opportunity to engage with these policies with staff. So I do know that we are potentially positioned better than some of the other municipalities that this correspondence would have gone out to. So the direction that I'm looking for is just for Southwestern Public Health has essentially offered to have a look at what we do and see if there's any recommendations that they would make. So that's all that this motion is for. If there are recommendations, then staff can bring them back for consideration.
Is there any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 11, boards and committees. I have a motion here to receive and file both A and B. Does anybody want to do anything different than that? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that items 11A and B be received and filed for information purposes only. Before I go to Paul, is there any questions or discussion on B? Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
The March 26th meeting of the Upper Thames Board was relatively uneventful. We had some changes to the terms of reference for the Finance and Audit Committee. I won't bore anybody with those. Reappointment of officers. This was through the one of the many changing provincial legislation. We had to reappoint all our conservation authorities officers. And there are 15 officers who work at the conservation areas, and there are 7 officers that work through planning and regulations, and they are quasi policemen in their own areas of expertise. We talked about interim policy for planning and regulations department. There again, it's because of changes in legislation, just outlining that any applications and permits that were in the system up to April 1st, 2024 would be covered under the previous regulations, and anything after that would be under the current regulations until those current regulations change again, and then there'll be a new policy adopted. That's why it's called an interim policy. We had the annual health and safety report. Both injuries requiring first aid were up slightly, and lost time injuries were up a little bit, but that's primarily because staff was doing a lot more in 2023 than they'd been doing in the previous 2 years. And an interesting thing, Upper Thames has joined the Health and Safety Excellence Program, and the head of the Health and Safety Department is developing 5 training programs which will cover 5 health and safety topics, which will be presented to all staff over the next 12 months. And in return, the Upper Thames will be receiving a SIB rebate of $23,500. So I don't know if that program is available to municipalities, but if it is, it might be worth looking into if it's worthwhile. We had a closed session dealing with the acquisition of land and also ongoing issues with the cottage program at Fanshawe Park. But other than that, that's what we did.
Comments from council? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that items 11A and B be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 12 information items. I have a motion here to receive and file A through C, being that we removed D at adoption of the agenda. Anybody want to do anything different than that before I read the motion? Moved by, I don't have a seconder. Somebody willing to? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Finch, that items 12A through C be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no unfinished business, nor was the motion. No bylaws. So, items of community interest and the calendar. Councillor Finch.
This is the last weekend for the 4-H pancake, so make sure you get out there and support that. The Embro Legion is doing their brunch April 7th and May 5th. April 6th, the Caledonians are having their tartan pub night at the Embro Legion. Tickets are $25 from 7 to 11 p.m. and you have to get those in advance. April 6th from 1 to 3, Kintor Coffee is hosting a Learn to Knit workshop put on by the Embro Fair Committee. Knox United Church in Embro is doing their drive-through pork barbecue dinner April 10th, 5 to 7. Tickets are $25 and you need to get them in advance. The Thamesford Lions is doing their annual drop-off recycling day April 20th at the Thamesford Rec Center. And April 25th, the Harrington Hall Constable Randy Crawford is speaking on property crimes and fraud.
And I don't think you hit on April 10th, this is for, not for public, but really for council and staff, on April 10th, the evening, the Zorra Staff Recognition event. Any other events? Councillor Mitchell.
Sunday, April 14th, Christchurch Lakeside is having a pancake brunch from 10:30 to 1:30.
Anyone else? All right, then. Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that bylaw 19-24, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held April 3rd, 2024, be read a first, second, and third time this April 3rd, 2024, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And finally, moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 11:15 a.m. And the next meeting of council be called for April 17th, 2024 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers of the Township Municipal Office. Is there any discussion?